Hello and welcome to Korean with Val. In this lesson, we're going to talk about dependent nouns. As the name says, they are nouns that can't stand alone. They need to appear with some other element. Here are some of the patterns that they can appear in. For example, you can have a determiner, let's say that, dependent noun, and then you finish off the sentence with a verb or a clause. Then you can have a verb, usually in some kind of form, some modified form. Then you have a dependent noun, and then again you finish off the sentence with a verb or a clause. Also, you can have a noun, and then a dependent noun, and then a verb or a clause to finish the sentence. So why do we need to learn these dependent nouns when they can't even stand alone? Well, they might have some attachment issues, but they are very, very important and very, very common. They are used in so many expressions, so many phrases, and they are also used to make some very common grammatical structures. For today's lesson, I've chosen 10 dependent nouns. There are several more, but I would say these are the ones you will encounter most often. And then, after learning these 10, I think you will be able to quickly figure out the logic of any new one you come across. Now, to make all this a bit easier, I would like you to imagine a character. So our character is someone who loves books. And this person loves buying books as well. So all our example sentences will be revolving around buying books. This is just to make it a bit easier for us, so we don't have to learn a lot of vocabulary along with the grammar, okay? Just try to keep it in mind that we have this imagined character of ours, all right? The first dependent noun we'll cover is the most important one, got. It means thing in the most general sense of the word. Since it's so common, it's often shortened to go, and when it appears with the most common particles, it has special shorter forms. For example, with the subject particle, it is shortened to ge. With the topic particle, it is shortened to gon, and with the object particle, it is shortened to gol. The most basic use of this dependent noun is when you want to say this thing or that thing. Let's look at our first example. Kugo chekiyeyo. That is a book. Here, go is paired with the determiner ku, which means that. Got is also used to form all kinds of phrases and even tenses. Most notably the future tense. Let's look at the second example. Neil check salgoya. I'm going to buy a book tomorrow. The tense here consists of the verb in a modified form, got, and the verb to be. Our third example, oje san got chekiyeyo, is a sort of relative sentence. So the thing I bought yesterday is a book. Our second dependent noun is su, which means ability. It is used to make sentences with can and can't. First, you need to have a verb, a modified verb, then you put su, and then you put ita to exist or opta not to exist. Let's look at the examples. Onu check salsu isoyo. I can buy a book today. Onu check salsu opsoyo. I can't buy a book today. If you look carefully, the structure of these two sentences is completely the same. The only difference is the verb at the end, isoyo or opsoyo. Literally, these sentences mean, for me, the ability to buy a book today exists. And the second one, for me, the ability to buy a book doesn't exist. Maybe it is a bit easier if you think of it in this way instead of trying to translate it into English completely with can or can't. The third dependent noun is te, time. It is used with a verb or with other nouns. In our example, 학생 때 책 많이 샀어요. When I was a student, I bought a lot of books. It is used with the noun 학생, student. In English, you would need to say when I was a student, but in Korean, you can just say student time. Of course, you can make a Korean sentence with a verb, so it would be when I was a student if you want to, but that is not necessary. The next dependent noun is temun, reason. It can be preceded by a verb or by a single noun. It is usually followed by the particle e or the verb to be. In our example, "Ček temu ne ton opsojo," because of books I have no money, it is used with a noun. You can maybe think of it as temun being because and e being of, so because of books. That might make it a bit easier. Our fifth dependent noun is jok, experience. It is very similar to su, ability. It needs a verb, and then at the end you have ita, to exist, or opta, not to exist. The way the verb is modified is a bit different between the two, but we'll leave that for later when we study verbs. Let's look at our example. Ček san jok isojo. Have you ever bought a book? So it is often translated as present perfect in English, but literally it means, for me, the experience of buying books exists. Or if you use it in negative sentences, the experience of buying books doesn't exist. So if you think of it like this, I think it is a bit easier to understand, rather than if you think of it as present perfect. Next we have jok, which means side or direction. It sounds very similar to the previous one, jok for experience, but please note that it is spelled very differently. It is usually used to say here, there, or phrases with north, south, and so on. Here we have ku jok ček manajo. On that side, so over there are a lot of books. Our next dependent noun is a bit tricky. Jul means fact, and it is used most often to say that you either know or knew something, or to express your thoughts, or to guess. The verb in front of it can be in present, future, or past, and after it you usually have a verb connected to thinking. So you have verbs to think, to know, not to know, and so on. Let's look at our example. Ček sal jul arasojo. I knew you were going to buy books. Literally, it would be, I knew the fact that you were going to buy books. This is one very typical use, when you guessed someone's behavior. You can also use it for when you thought someone would do something, but they didn't do it. This is the type of situations this noun is used in. As I said, this one can sometimes be tricky to properly understand, since it can be very nuanced, but with exposure to it, you will learn to recognize it and use it. It does take a lot of knowledge about verbs too, so we'll talk about it more later on when we learn verbs. Our next dependent noun, jung, means middle, and it is usually used when someone is in the middle of doing something. Like in our example. Ček sanun jung iejo. I'm in the middle of buying books. It is usually followed by the particle e or by the word to be, like in our example. Our ninth dependent noun, ji, means since. You need a modified verb before it and usually a time expression after it. Most of the time, you finish the sentence with the word to become. Let's look at our example. Ček sanji iljuil 됐어요. It has been a week since I bought a book. And finally, our last dependent noun is dongan. It means during, and it can be used with a verb or with a noun. In our example, Ček sa는 동안 친구 만났어요. While I was buying books, I met a friend. It is used with the verb. Here we have all 10 dependent nouns that we have covered today. For this lesson, I just wanted to show you their meanings and how they work, so you can understand their place in the language. To use them, you need to combine them with other, sometimes quite complex elements. But that will come later, especially as you learn more about verbs. So for today, just recognizing them and knowing their meaning is enough. You will learn much more about how to use them later on when you learn how to use verbs. Next time, we'll talk about nominal forms, or how to turn other parts of speech into nouns. Thank you so much for joining me today, and see you next time.